Hello and welcome to a uh, Star Trek commentary where I am reviewing and commenting on every episode of Star Trek. Today I'll be doing the original series season 1 episode 20. Tomorrow is yesterday. Now this is an episode that I have not watched in quite some time. In fact, it's been one that has been so long that I have even forgotten what it's about. The only thing that I can tell you is the Netflix summary, where the Enterprise somehow goes back in time to 1960s Earth, and somehow needs to clean up any evidence of its uh, arrival there prior to returning back to the 23rd century. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting one to watch, and almost going to be like a first time watching kind of thing with me. So let us go where no one has gone before, or 1960s people have gone before anyway. So first of all, I do understand the whole point of this episode. At least the reason why they would need to clean up the evidence of their arrival there, because well, the temporal prime directive, which I wonder if it's actually even a thing at this point. Not that it would really, um, yeah, make him, yeah, there would be a mention of it. But anyway, the episode starts with um, some scenes at an Air Force base and a radar officer just pointing out that a blip came up on the scope out of nowhere. So the commander or whatever sends a plane up to go and have a look, and we see the Enterprise in the clouds. Wondering how the heck it got there is going to be anyone's guess. So we end up on the bridge of the Enterprise. The captain's log at the start of the episode uh, lets us know that due to a black star uh, happening um, on the in the pathway that the Enterprise is traveling, they end up being snapped away to somewhere. They've got no clue where at this point. Most of the ship is shut down. They still have some basic systems, but they have no idea where, or in this case, when. Well, kind of both things. Yeah, kind of. They are at this point. Systems are starting to come back online, um, and Kirk is ordered for basic damage report for everyone to report to Spock, so that they can know where, so that he can get the lay of the ship essentially, and yeah, standard thing for a captain to do once something like that has happened. So, Kirk orders Uhura to try and contact Starfleet. Spock radio lets Kirk know that that looks like the Whiplash breakaway thing from the Black Star landed them in orbit of Earth, which was the direction that they were apparently headed in after leaving the starbase they were at. Um, but when Uhura is unable to get through to Starfleet, and that there's no uh, kind of communication or information happening on that channel, that there is an alternate frequency that she's picking something up on, and it turns out to be a radio of of a moon landing that's due to occur. They realize, hold the phone, we've gone back in time. What the hell? Um, and they've also been detected because there's a fighter plane or an interceptor which is being scrambled uh, to see them, or to try and investigate what the heck this blip on the radar was. It has managed to catch up to them, even though they are trying to get back into orbit, but the Enterprise is slow moving again because it's been damaged from the trip. And yeah, we continue. Now we get to what I would call some unorthodox kind of thing. So instead of continuing to try to escape or potentially risk coming under attack, Kirk decides to try and track this plane. It ends up breaking up, and he ends up beaming the pilot aboard. Something which I'm sure that were there a Department of Temporal Investigations part of Starfleet at this point in time, I'm sure would not have gone down well at all. Um, in fact, I do remember from a later episode of DS9, which I'll get to at some future date, that it gets mentioned that Kirk is one of the worst breakers of the Temporal Prime directive that department has come to know. And this here would be a classic example of it. And yeah, because the number of rules that I'm sure are going to be broken in this episode, just in these first few minutes that I'm seeing, is going to be rather staggering now, I'm thinking. Okay, so Kirk is taken into the bridge. He's Captain Christopher, who's the pilot, um, is a little surprised to see women serving, but yeah. And he, uh, Kirk lets him kind of look around the bridge while he and Spock have a brief conversation to the side. I do like what they do as far as, and I'll get to this a bit more later, but the radio room from the Next Generation series onwards, because it does something like that does come in handy for side conversations which are not which should not be had on the bridge. But anyway, it is a valid argument that Spock puts forward that, um, and it's almost the beginnings, if you will, of what would become the Temporal Prime Directive, because who knows what kind of or what changes or what kind of contamination could happen with the knowledge that Captain Christopher is getting of the future. Because if he or someone with less morals than him were to gain future knowledge and to use that to manipulate the past, it could alter the future in ways that would not be useful at all or would not be helpful at all. In fact, it would be rather hazardous. I mean, the Federation may not happen, Starfleet may not happen, First Contact may not happen. There's a lot of things that could not happen or may happen in other ways than what has been recorded in history. Um, and they are, justified concerns. And Kirk is only just realizing maybe I shouldn't have brought this guy on board, or maybe I should try to contain his curiosity or his, the knowledge that that or the future knowledge that he gets exposed to try and limit the contamination. But um, and he's starting to realize that maybe the seriousness of what has actually happened here. So Kirk is in his quarters now. Um, the computer has had a bit of a interesting thing in that whenever he records a captain's log or interacts with it, it now addresses him as dear. And Spock and Captain Christopher come in, and uh, Kirk is told, makes the comment that, I had ordered these computer glitches fixed, and Spock reports to Captain Christopher that due to an overhaul or system upgrade at a planet entirely populated or basically a matriarchal society, uh, that um, these computer changes got put in place, and it's going to take 3 weeks at a starbase to repair them, which I find somewhat amusing. So Kirk and Spock end up talking to Captain Christopher, um, and about several things. Among them, that he can't go back,
because of the temporal contamination that would occur. Um, with because Kirk does agree with with Captain Christopher that if he goes back, he would be forced to report on what he's seeing, what he's experienced, and whatnot to his superiors, whether or not they would disclose it, and what kind of effect that would have on Earth at that time, and therefore the history as Kirk and Spock know it is unknown and could be rather terrible potentially. Um, Not to mention the fact that, and Captain Kirk's saying, hold on a minute. I need to get home. I need to get back to my, to my wife and kids, and to the life that that I've got there. But uh, it is quite understandable that, um, as well, that this is not going to be able to happen. So I'm curious to see if Captain Kirk is going to be able to go home and is going to be trusted with the information to keep it secret, to keep it safe, quoting Gandalf. um, or if he's going to need to stay with them and kind of learn what it's like in the 23rd century. So let's keep watching and see what happens next. Scotty then communicates, with the captain and says, "Look, we've managed to get everything, or well, should be able to get everything repaired enough to be able to go somewhere um, within, say, the next 4 hours or so. But uh, the question is where? Because in 1960s Earth, there's nowhere for them to go. If they were to, travel to any Federation world, there would be massive contamination that way because, again, future knowledge affecting the past. Um, and Captain Crispr makes a valid observation. You're just as much a prisoner in time as I am, which again, well, somehow poses the question that Kirk and crew of the Enterprise somehow needs to be able to travel forward in time back to where they left. And I'm starting to think that may be where the episode title comes from, being that they undershoot the mark by just 1 day in terms of their return journey, making tomorrow yesterday. But we'll see. I'll make a comment at this point, just for the humor of it, that um, Kirk is recording another captain's log, just basically bring things up to speed. I love the computer glitch that's happening at the moment, and as an FYI, Majel Barrett, Gene Roddenberry's, I'm not sure if they were married at this point, but future wife or current wife, whatever, who's the voice of the computer, and you can, I just love the fact that when Kirk says, "I recommend that this glitch," in other words, the female voice, and the fact that it's always calling him dear, that it be repaired or scrapped, and it's just a hurt feeling. Computer dear, oh, I just find it really cute and really humorous, particularly for Kirk, who's quite the known as quite the ladies' man, and yet he can't handle a female computer. Okay, so apparently there's some new information that Spock has found regarding Captain Christopher, and he's wanting to see both captains, Christopher and Kirk, right away. Kirk, kind of summons them both to his quarters, but is unable to get through to Captain Christopher. And makes a logical assumption that he's going to try and escape the ship because, again, he wants to try and get back to his life. But Kirk manages to intercept him on the way. Once again, a red shirt ends up being knocked out, but, well, that has to happen in at least once in every episode from here on in, I believe. So we'll see what happens next. Okay, so McCoy and Kirk are starting to talk about the chicken and the egg scenario, the rock and the hard place to be a bit more accurate kind of scenario that they're finding themselves in because um, if they end up having to stay because they can't find a way back, they can't go to Earth because that's 430 ways in terms of 430 crewmen, officers and men on the Enterprise, 430 ways to or opportunities or people who could contaminate the timeline in one way or another. something which I find very interesting given Star Trek movies and later episodes and whatnot that that happens. But I will discuss those when I get to them. Uh, but Kirk is, but that is certainly a very valid point. And by the same token, if they do end up finding a way back, then what's Captain Crystal going to do? Because he's going to be a man out of time. And he's not going to understand how anything works, any of the history, any of the races, or anything like that. He's going to be completely useless in what I will call Kirk's present. So the question becomes, what do they do? And it is a very valid question, one that at this point in time, even I can't quite think of an answer, unless they can. See, here's the thing: while the brain is largely unexplored, and I don't know how much of the brain is known about or understood at in Kirk's present, whether or not the brain can be, or the memory can be altered, is a very good question. I mean, I do know that in our time, as in now, the 2000s, there are ways to alter memory with, with drugs and, well, copious amounts of alcohol if you really want to have some fun with it, uh, or hypnosis and various other methods that that are out there. So I find it somewhat interesting that such things weren't really discussed or raised or available in Kirk's present time. So, because that would be the easy option. We just erase or alter Christopher's memory, so that he has no recollection of it, and create a slight false one. He ejected from his plane. It broke up. He didn't see anything or whatever, and he was rescued and all hunky dory with that, and with a mild mystery that ends up never being solved. Something for which there's many of in our day, unsolved mysteries. But we'll see what they end up actually doing. And the contamination continues. So, um, Kirk raises the question, could he be retrained to be at his family? And of course, that was a no. And then Spock enters the room, sick bay, and says, I actually made a mistake. Because while you yourself may not necessarily do much, your son is going to make a rather significant contribution. And he's like, hold on, I don't have a son. You mean yet? Goes McCoy. And the again, the contamination is just getting worse in terms of, and it's just this one person in terms of Captain Christopher. I mean, no one else is getting this information, thankfully. But the more information, and I don't know. Let's just say that I really do appreciate the temporal prime directive. When it does actually come about. But it's something that, and this has got to be a classic experience. Kind of indicating why such a thing would be required. And I also find it interesting that this has got to be the first experience, or Starfleet's first experience with time travel. I could get into the Star Trek Enterprise series, which is set before this, and make some comments there, but I'm going to leave that until I actually get to it, whenever that happens to be. But the fact that they are not having any kind of consideration for um, for the kind of effect that releasing this information or future information to someone is going to have is rather staggering to me. Okay, so now we're in a conversation in the conference room with both captains, Christopher and Kirk and Spock, and talking about the various issues that they're facing, which are quite reasonable in terms of the effects on the the 1960s, and with the radio transmissions that were intercepted, the photos that would be part of the plane's black box that would have landed in somewhere in Nebraska, uh, and the various uh, effects that that would have. And Spock quite rightly says that it. All right, Kirk actually makes the observation. These things were at the time being dismissed as explainable things, at least to the public, hot air balloons or sunspots or whatever. But Spock is saying, says, that with this and all this evidence, we are obviously going to be a hostile alien or something, because we did, kind of destroy a plane. So somehow they need to clear up that their actual contamination in of itself from their arrival, and their initial events, upon their arrival. Not to mention somehow being able to return Captain Christopher in a way that is explainable instead of disappearing out of thin air, or where the heck have you been for the past 2 days, um, or kind of whatever, and trying to come up with some kind of plausible story for that. And then there's also the problem of how the heck do they get back? Spock makes the idea, well, if we just reverse course and go back to the way we came, hopefully we'll be able to get back. But there's a number of other variables that I can't possibly know, essentially, that could affect us, and we may end up going further back in time, going further forward in time than we plan, or any number of other variables that could affect the outcome. So I do agree that right now it's a really tough situation that they're finding themselves in. Now things are starting to get a little bit, well, more complicated. And I do wonder what's about to happen here. Captain Christopher, upon realizing that he may be able to go home if the evidence, uh, being the video and audio recordings, are destroyed, that he may be able to go home and end up having a son. Um, he, offers to, draw a layout at the Nebraska Air Force Base, so they can know where the records room and audio recordings and whatnot are, so they know where to go to destroy the evidence. The thing which I find interesting about this is going to require an amazing amount of stealth, which granted the transporter does give them. Um, and one thing which I find funny or risky, risky is a better word, uh, is the fact that Kirk and Sulu, no issues there. First of all, Sulu, actually no, I do have a problem with Sulu being the one to beam down. Um, because I don't know what the Americas were like in the 60s too much. But two things, I've got problems. One, they're being down in their Starfleet uniforms instead of Air Force uniforms, so they're going to stand out like the sore thumb in that way. Secondly, I don't know what the Asia and America relations were like at the time, but I do believe they were a little bit strained. I don't know if there were any Asians actually employed in the American Air Force at the time. Hopefully they were, and so that may not have been as much of a complication as they may be making it out to be. But the other thing is that they're beaming down into a hallway instead of into the records room itself. Because personally, what I would have done, we've been down to the audio records room, destroy those records, transport to the photo lab, to destroy the records there, and then beam back to the ship. Two transports, lack of or less risk that way, but instead being into a hallway where anyone just walking down can see rather than enclose the room. The other problem that I have is that if these records being freshly discovered, uh, and they wouldn't have been left alone. They would have been under guard. They would be actively being reviewed and assessed. Um, and I can't see them being left even overnight. For anyone to for any unauthorized person to be able to do anything with. So I do have another problem in that way because the second that anyone unauthorized walks into the room, it's going to be, huh? What the hell are you doing here? You're under arrest. And contamination gets 10 times worse. But let's see what they do. So Kirk and Sulu are wandering around, taking it very slow, which again puzzles the hell out of me, because one would think that if you're granted while you're trying to be covert, you don't want to necessarily move too fast, but you also don't want to hang about in the open too much as well when you're going to stand out like a sore thumb. Anyway, they make their way to the records room, and Kirk sees that there's a primitive computer there, which would most likely be where most of the information is kept. And he tells Sulu, "I'm not going to turn it on because it's going to make a lot of noise and alert everyone to the fact that we're here." Uh, but I got a feeling he intends to blow it up, which may not, which may also have just as bad an effect. The contamination gets worse. So there's an initial brief exchange between Spock and McCoy in the transporter room. The whole point basically being to say it's been about 15 minutes that Kirk and Phil have been down there. And also to point out that Spock is continuing to work on his time warp calculations so they can get back when the contamination is being dealt with. Uh, and then we get back down to Kirk and Sulu, and sprung! A guard finds them, gets some of their equipment, and ends up being beamed aboard the Enterprise when an emergency signal gets raised. And right now, I swear, I mean, if there was a Department of Temporal Investigations, they are so rolling their eyes and going, "Oh my goodness, how much worse can this get?" I mean, really? It should have just been beam into the room, lob a grenade, or better yet, because it's an old-style computer, just lob a few magnets. You know, this was before the days when computers were protected from magnetic energy. Magnets usually did a pretty good job of erasing material on hard drives and whatnot. So do that. Throw a couple of magnets at it. And that'll be explainable enough reason for the data no longer being there. But nope. And now we've got one Air Force guard um, who's now been beamed aboard, and the contamination is just early. Okay, so uh, Kirk and Spock end up talking and saying, don't let the Air Force guard out of the transporter room. Spock says, the guy's too stunned to really go anywhere, so that's not going to be a problem. Kirk and Sulu um, retrieve the remaining audio tapes and head over to the photo lab. I find it funny that the audio lab where they initially were has not set up an alarm, but the photo lab has. I mean, really? Um, Kirk manages to stage a bit of a diversion so that Philly can beam up with all the evidence, but ends up being captured. After all, he was trying to take on 3 Air Force people. Was doing pretty well, for a while, but ends up being captured, and so contamination the other way. Now, instead of people being up, there's contamination with him being down. So, I mean, I'm just rolling my eyes so much at this episode, but yeah, let's see how they get out of this rather large pickle without contaminating the timeline. So, Spock and Sulu and McCoy are now in the briefing room and have confirmed that they've got all the evidence. They now just need to worry about how to get Kirk back because without some way of locating him, without a communicator or anything like that, he's got no way of being able to get back to the ship. Spock has asked Captain Christopher to the briefing room for some reason, and we'll find out about that in a few moments. But Kirk is being interrogated by the Air Force personnel, a colonel and another guard. Uh, and again, I'm just rolling my eyes so much at this episode because of the level of contamination that's happening. Kirk is not hiding anything about who he is, and he does, not that he's believed, but he does tell the truth, saying that he popped out of thin air, which essentially he did, um, in terms of getting onto the base. And thankfully, the contamination here is somewhat minimal because he's not believed, but that's still. I mean, couldn't you come up with some kind of plausible cover story of some kind? So further to the interrogation, or at least at the end of the interrogation scene, the colonel says, there was everything that I could charge you with. I could lock you up for nearly 200 years. To which, Kirk says, that's probably going to be about right to get back to his own time. Um, but anyway, back at on board the Enterprise with Christopher, McCoy, Sulu, and Spock. Um, Christopher is, Spock is asking, well, can you tell us where the interrogation rooms would be, that where Kirk would be being held? Christopher is like, yeah, I could, but you'll need to take me with you, and he's trying to learn how to negotiate. I will say good for him. But it's also, again, risking further contamination with him being able to beam down and potentially switch sides. Uh, kind of potentially turning on the landing party. But again, we'll see what happens with that. But Spock ultimately ends up agreeing to beam down. So it's him, Sulu, and Christopher who are going to beam down. Spock and Sulu are going to be armed. Christopher is not. And we'll see how much worse this makes contamination happen. Be. So they end up beaming down right in front of the Air Force guard that was accidentally beamed up. And contamination gets mildly worse. I mean, at this point, it's like, what the hell? Because uh, Transporter Chief Kyle uh, asks him if he's hungry and shows him a food replicator, which doesn't require him leaving the room. I'm surprised there's three of them in there, but given the long hours that one may have in the transporter room without much to do, um, I'm a little surprised that it's manned all the time. I mean, I agree that there's a potential reason for that in case of an emergency situation, but there's usually some kind of warning of an emergency, and so someone can get in there on an as-needed basis. But still, the fact that there's three food replicators, and I'm going to keep a bit of a closer eye on set design on that one to see if they're always there, or if that's just in this episode. But anyway, this Air Force guard gets exposed to a food replicator. Um, they the away team of Spock, Sulu, and Christopher beam down. They end up freeing the captain, but then, as I expected, uh, Christopher ends up turning on them, and we'll see how this pickle ends up. Spock must have done some reconnaissance, or gotten a bit of the lay of the land of that particular section of the base, some scanning of it to know that there was a way around because he was able to get the jump on Christopher by working his way around from where he was. Um, and now that we're into the last, say, 10 minutes ish of the episode, I'm really curious to see how they end up, kind of solving the two critical uh, questions of the episode. They've managed to get rid of all the evidence, so they've taken care of that part. But they still need to a get Christopher back so that his son can be born and so on, and so that the timeline can progress the way that it should with him. But I also need to find a way to return to their own time. So let's keep going and see how they solve these things. Okay. Huh? Really? So the plan is to do a kind of slingshot maneuver toward the sun and back, with the idea being that if they go towards the sun fast enough, they'll be going backwards in time and they'll be able to return Christopher and the Air Force Guard to a time before they left. Therefore, what happened never happened, and that I have nothing to remember, which is a load of crap. Because for one, they're already on the ship, and once they beam them down, there's technically going if they beam down, if they take them back before yesterday, there's going to technically, well, not technically, there would be two of them. Um, and so it's not like they're going to be beaming them into their own bodies minus the experiences they just had. So I really don't get how the hell that logic works. I mean, um, I'm kind of reminded a bit of the whole Big Bang Theory episode with Back to the Future, with the whole Back to the Future 2 explanation, the had brought thing, in the various timelines that the guys that were kind of talking about. Um, because anyway you slice it, there is an alternate timeline that's going to be created here, and yet it's just being completely ignored and rather butchered in my mind, but still. And then with the going forward in time, we go too far forward, we end up overshooting our time possibly, which yeah, that part I'll buy. That that's fair. I end up stopping too suddenly, and we end up destroying the ship again. Hey, I'm enjoying this episode from an entertainment standpoint, but from a storyline thing, I am going to have some comments when it's done. Okay, so it turns out I was wrong. So with the last few minutes of the episode, first of all, I love the fact that I'm watching the remastered, not although the original 60s version would have been pretty cool too, with the graphics at the time, but this is a remastered one that they got on Netflix. Anyway, so it turns out that I was wrong with that was what they were planning on doing. And they did the whole slingshot thing. And again, it makes no sense whatsoever. Because they do get beamed back into both Christopher and the guard get put back into their own bodies. Just at the time that those their own events occurred. No evidence, so no contamination. Again, which I think is just a pretty cheap cop out for it all. But still, that's what they went with. Not to mention the fact that they were still warping out of the system. They weren't in any kind of slingshot thing or anything like that. It was just they were going at warp 9. Well, or faster than warp 8 anyway. We don't. I'm not sure if they actually reached warp 9. And I find it funny if they were actually going at warp 8.8. To bring a little Back to the Future into it. Because if they're going warp 88 miles an hour, the DeLorean whole bit. Still, okay, but they end up getting back to their own time, and so the episode ends. So, overall, yes, an entertaining episode. Yes, with many, many major plot holes, but still worth a watch, an enjoyable watch. Um, and this was almost like a first watch for me because while yes, I have seen this episode before, it has been many, many, many years, when I had forgotten various things that have happened. But overall, it was a good episode, so I did enjoy it. So anyway, I'm glad to have been able to have gone through another episode with my fellow listeners. If you feel free to please like, subscribe, comment um, on your thoughts on the episode or your thoughts on my podcast recording thing that I'm doing here because I do want to know. I'm glad to see that there are people listening and that there are people actually enjoying my podcast. Um, but please like and comment and subscribe so you can keep going through the Star Trek journey with me. Live long and prosper, and Kapla.